Thank you so much, Sanjoy, for that really marvelous introduction. You've said a lot of things that we would probably have covered during the course of our conversation. Um, if you are a dog parent, you would know that there's nothing that we enjoy more than talking about our dogs. It's hard to get us to shut up. So I think 50 minutes is not enough. So I'm going to dive straight into the conversation. Let's start by talking about each of your books. And Sanjay, I wanted to talk to you about the wonderful Louis.
Okay.
I think everyone in the audience would know you in a slightly different avatar. But you and I have met over Louis, spoken about it, had deep conversations, and I'd really like you to introduce Louis to the world and also tell us how it was transformative to have Louis in your life.
Yeah, hi. Good morning. If Louis was here on the stage, the first thing he would ask you is, raise your hand if you love dogs, cats, and animals. Jaipur, we love you. I think you're seeing here on the stage 4 people who are crazy about dogs and animals. So please embrace a lot of madness. We are not normal people. We are pretty crazy. We are pretty insane. And we are hard to predict. Well, thank you very much, Hemali. I think, when I look back at Louis' story, and I think we'll talk about it over the next 50 minutes, the one word that comes to my mind is chaos. And, I think a lot of people don't realize that, we have become we lead our lives with structures. What do I do in the morning? What do I do in the afternoon? What have I planned for the evening? We have calendars, we have appointment schedules. You have Louis in your life and nothing plays to script. And I am lucky in a great number of ways because I grew up as a child with dogs in the home. And we still have a couple back in Mumbai. But if I were to be born again, I would love to be born as a dog. Would you agree with that? Guys, can we have Jaipur with a more boisterous? Yeah, there we go. And I'll tell you, I have reasons for that, okay? And these reasons are wicked in a way. For one, you can sleep at any time, and you can probably sleep better than maybe somebody who owns a 27-floor skyscraper in Mumbai, okay? You can do a natural yoga stretch, a dog pose, better than Baba Ramdev. If you're born a dog, you can have multiple sexual partners, even beating Mr. Donald Trump. I'm not done yet. And you can bark much louder than that one comical guy who comes and says, the nation wants to know. And last but not the least, you can have a deep shit while listening to Man Ki Baat. I think the larger point that dogs teach us is this, that, the simple things in life that we tend to forget are the ones that matter. And I think when I look at Louis' journey in our life, and my wife and daughter are here as well, that you have to be, shall we say, all dog lovers feel it, that we are incomplete without their presence in our lives. And I always tell that to a lot of people who don't have dogs in Mumbai. I have a friend who says, I haven't taken a dog because, my sofa can get dirty. Where do I take them out for a poo? And I'm like, your life is going to be so incomplete without it.
You don't know what you're missing.
Exactly. So I would like to end by that and then listen to Gunbir and Baichung as well. But I think Louis, in a great number of ways, changed our lives, defined our lives. But I'll talk to you more about it in detail later.
I did want to actually come back to Louis and also about why you chose to write in his voice rather than yours, but we'll come back to that. Bhuchang, I was very struck by songs from Devachan. We've spoken about it, and I think in your book, it's a bit different, isn't it? Because there are dogs, but dogs are metaphors. There is satire, there is grief, there is humor, there is subversiveness. And I think what you are really doing is looking at the idea of a dog to talk about a lot of things that disturb you. So do you want to tell us a bit about that and how that came about?
Good morning. Indeed, my book is in many ways different from Sanjay Ji's and Gunbir Ji's because I have used dogs, despite the fact that dogs are intelligent and they can express so many things with their facial and other things. But they cannot speak in a way that we do. And my idea is if they have the power to write and speak, what would they say? So I have used dogs in many different manifestations. I have 40 plus poems here. Each of them either feature a dog or a dog as a narrator. And I wanted to say things in a way that is metaphoric, where that is not straight, as in a literature. It's a literary device. And how would a dog express something, a grief, or a loss, or a torture from a human being, for that matter? So I think that's what I was trying to do. And it's not a happy book. It's dark. It's a dark book because I was trying to express many things that are happening here and in my own country, in Tibet, and elsewhere in the world, and the circumstances that we live. It's a bleak world in many ways, but I wanted these bleakness to come out of a dog's mouth. That's what I tried to do. And if I may, I can read a poem just to
Please do.
indicate.
Please.
2 weeks after I was born, with my eyes yet to open, I was given away to a man who lived in a large, cold house standing at the edge of the town. From a refrigerator, he gave me a tiny bit of a milk on a plate from which I licked with my tongue rather than a monkey's bottom. He then took me downstairs and placed me under an upturned bucket. I was enveloped in double darkness. In the sitting room, he sat alone and drank himself to absolute intoxication. By next morning, both of us were dead. He on the large leather sofa with his eyes wide open, staring into nothingness, and I under an upturned blue bucket with my eyes still unopened. Thank you.
It's very powerful. Gunbir, the wonderful Biba the Ginger, and the wonderful story behind the name of the book and the multiple names that you came across. Tell us a bit about the book and also about Biba. And I think you mentioned that it was around COVID that you thought about the project, which is interesting. So we'd love to hear more.
So, Biba came about, as I mentioned, Hemali, to you, I was writing a book which was completely different, set in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or the trade that we used to do between Peshawar and Kabul. And then COVID happened. So during that time, we were walking because there was little else we could do. So we walked a lot, Biba and I. And that's when I started noticing more the relationship that humans have with the species, and also how dogs and other animals relate to the idiosyncrasies that humans have. I mean, we are the wildest animals around the world, absolutely. This earth we think is ours for sure, and nothing else matters. But frankly, during those times, what I noticed and how people started being kinder to the dogs in the neighborhood, whether they were feral or otherwise. Suddenly bowls of water came out, bowls of food and milk came out onto the street outside the houses of people who were in a terrible state. They were encaged and the dogs were outside having a free time. And that's when I started writing this story about Biba. Now the name is funny because we are a crazy family to begin with. My first dog was called totally different names by the household. My wife wanted to call him Brutus. My sons wanted to call him Rufus. I wanted to call him Caesar, and eventually I named him Rufus Brutus Caesar VI. And Boo was his short name. So now Biba is because I wanted to call it Biba, because Biba in colloquial Punjabi means a good little girl. Whereas the rest of the family wanted to call her Ginger, and I said, my goodness, the next would be garlic then. So the book became Biba the Ginger and her stories through her eyes.
I think one of the things about getting a dog to adopt you, I'm not going to say it the other way around, is that your perspective changes in a lot of ways. You view things differently. I mean, I think the world seems, to me, it seems like there is so much happening around you, and then you go back and there's the dog, and you are in the moment. That's all. You just live in the moment. So I'd love to hear from you, each of you. One, what was the first relationship? At what age did you have your first close relationship with a dog? Was it a dog in your family? Was it a street dog? And also, how have dogs been transformative? I mean, I don't think there's any other word in your lives.
Well, I can tell you that, my first real intimate relationship, a real crazy love affair with a dog happened when I was in school with a young Tibetan terrier called Lizo. And in a great number of ways, Louis, on whom the entire book, My Illegitimate Son, is written, was not very dissimilar. Same size, Lizo was white, this guy was like absolutely stark black. But one of the famous quotes of Mark Twain is that it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And I think that really was Louis in a true sense. I wish it was also true for the Congress party, but we'll not discuss politics here. I think the larger point is that, when I look at dogs, and I would love to hear what both Gunbir and Baichung also feel, is the eyes. I think the eyes really tell it. We hear it all the time in Bollywood songs, aankhon se pyar izhar hota hai. But you look at a dog's eyes and they tell you a million stories. And I want to give you just two examples. One is, whenever we were, for example, having breakfast and we were making eggs, and the guy could just look at you without wavering his concentration. He looks into your eyeballs and you melt. I mean, I was thinking about how to say that, every egg you fry, every meat you eat, no matter how hard you try, I'll be watching you. I think it's that kind of passionate interaction that goes on. And, when you think about it, I remember one day, I remember distinctly, it was 16th of May, 2014. I was in Delhi, and I was returning back to Mumbai by a late night flight. Very depressing electoral whitewash. And I came home, and, everybody was very nice to me. And at some point in the night, I was just sitting in my drawing room and just, quietly introspecting. And this guy just walks out from some part of the house, and he walks close to you, and he just jumps into your lap. And he sat on my lap, and, I just cuddled him. And I think this ability of I think all animals, not just dogs in my opinion, but dogs are very expressive. I think at the end of the day, when he sat on my lap, it was almost like saying, man, you had a bad day. I think all your 5 years went down to waste. But it's okay, hang in there. You're not so bad at all. It's not dejection, it's not failure, it's okay. And I think these are the little moments in a great number of ways that define your relationship. So I just want to tell a lot of people, we live in an age of therapy and counseling and, self-help. But the best thing you can do is get yourself a dog.
My earliest memory of dog goes back when I was about 4 or 5 years old back in Tibet. We had a fairly large house, and one day my brother got a small puppy, and it grew into a fairly large dog, and it was named Jakchung, and my name is Bhuchang. And we used to go and swim in the Brahmaputra river, which runs just next to our house, and we had a really good time. And then one day it disappeared one night. And I remember my grandfather saying, "Sik ki khiri ngire." So maybe the leopard took it. So that was the last thing that I remember of the dog. And right now in exile, I don't have a pet. It's not that I don't love dogs, but it also has to, traditionally in Tibetan community, dogs or animals as a pet is not a huge thing. This is primarily because of where we look at life. The fundamental Tibetan outlook towards life in many ways is shaped by the philosophy of interconnected or the interdependent of all things, that you do not exist by yourself. You are made up of millions of things. So I think this philosophy gives me a really deep sense of looking at things with a great equanimity. I look at a tree as much as I look at myself. And I look at dog or animals, any other animals, as very much part of myself. So I think this is interconnectedness. And the more practical reason is the fact that we, now in exile, I, my wife, and two of our children, we live on a third floor in a one-bedroom apartment. So there is no space, basically, for a dog. And we discussed many times about adopting or picking up a pet dog. But then choice is made by us because we need a dog. So I need a dog. But what about dog's freedom? How could a dog be kept in a very small room with 4 people? So that also one of the things that we discussed about.
Yeah, so, as kids, all of us have wanted at least a puppy by our side. So it's such an incredible feeling. I got the opportunity when my father's friend, who was a banker, like Sanjay was at one point in time, and that gentleman was going overseas. So he left his dog in our care and said, I will not take him back. So this guy was a Samoyed, shimmering white, with a black spot on the eye. So he was called Popeye, like Popeye the Sailor Man. So he was my first experience. And right next to it, after Popeye passed, his sister also came to us in the same fashion. She was a Pom Samoyed, shimmering white again, with a brown spot on the back, and we called her obviously Brownie. So that's how it started, and then we had Pongo the Dalmatian, of course. We had a Silky Sydney called Rustam. My mum loved the name. And then we've had 2 boxers. One, of course, you've heard about, Boo. And the second is Biba, who's a ginger as well. So my feeling is that dogs and humans have a symbiotic relationship. I mean, it's a love affair which cannot go wrong and gives you just pleasure. But with that pleasure, as they say, grief is the cost you pay for love. So we do lose them, but while they are with you, they give you so much of love and affection, they make life worthwhile.
I did want to actually talk about loss, and after that, I promise you we are going to discuss some happy stories. But I think, so there is a saying that dogs come into our lives to teach us about love, and they depart to teach us about loss. And I think that is something that all of us have personally experienced. Do you want to talk a bit about that? Because Sanjay, I know that Louis, a large part of the book deals about the grief of losing him. How do you cope? Do you ever turn around and say, okay, this is it? I know people who are so devastated by the loss that they turn around and say, no more. I don't think I can go through this again. But for me personally, I think, would I trade all the love for, the fact that there is going to be loss? No. And I'd love to hear from the 3 of you how loss has, affected you and how you've dealt with it. And maybe we start with Louis.
Well, let me tell you that, I believe one of the lessons of life that I think we all should be ready for is that things can change in a flash of a moment, literally. And us people who have, lived with abrupt changes to their life, literally terminal. And you can read the book to know his entire story. It's very funny. I think somebody told me that your book reminds me of Karan Johar's Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum story.
I can see why.
Yeah, you can see why. I can just kind of tell you in a nutshell. Here was a guy who ran the fastest. You could not see him when he disappeared in front of your eyes. He was so fast. And then when things went a little bad for him, he had cancer. He recovered from cancer only to get paralyzed. He recovered from his paralysis almost entirely, and boom, a sudden event, a day which my family will probably never forget, 5th June 2021, and our lives just changed completely. What happened, how it happened, That's a story by itself. But you know, I have discovered one thing, and I would love to again hear both my fellow colleagues here, that I think you have to live through grief to get past it. You know, the biggest mistake we make is to believe in the people who say, move on. I think move on is, I think leave it for a courier company to make a tagline of that. I think the bottom line is that you don't really move on. I think what you come to is accept a certain reality that you can't change. And then you have to create your mechanisms to cope with that reality. So I'll give you one example. I was sitting for an 8 o'clock show on Times Now with Rahul Shivshankar. And I remember this was like a couple of weeks after Louis had died. And I was sitting there and he asked me a question and I had completely blanked out because in that few seconds that he hadn't asked me the question, I was thinking about him in some part of the room. And it seemed like, you know, I imagined him there, although I knew he was gone. And I was so kind of consumed by the moment that I hadn't even heard what Rahul had asked me. So he said, hi, Sanjay, did you hear my question? I said, no, I didn't hear it. I think there's an audio problem. And I got back into the mainstream. But the truth is that I think you got to understand, and I write that in the book, that grief is actually like a permanent guest. Once they come into your house, they're not checking out. The question is, how do you reconcile to that reality and the guest becomes part of your family? It's not going away anywhere. I think that acceptance is very important. And I do feel, Hemali, that I think the two things that I notice a lot with the way we are today as a society is that we're very awkward in expressing love and we are extremely inarticulate in expressing grief. You know, we are very scared to be vulnerable. You know, I may be a politician, I may be a father to 2 young girls, you know, I'm part of a larger conversation. But you know, I mean, you can't imagine the kind of overwhelming loss that you feel. It's okay to cry, you're not some kind of a robot, you're not an android, you're not a bot. And I think it's okay for us to be expressing our losses, you know, and I think in both grief as well as love, I think the two most powerful emotions, they're actually two sides of the same coin, you know. So I do feel that we are struggling with it because we want to be macho, we build walls, and we don't want to tell the world how we are feeling. But I think when you express yourself, you find there are so many people who echo with you. And I want to end by saying that's the one thing which I don't like about dogs. I love them, we all love them, but I don't like one thing about dogs. They have such a short life.
Bhuchang?
Well, yeah, my experience with the loss, of course, is the one that I spoke earlier about, the loss of that dog when I was about 4 or 5 years old. But I think my loss in my own personal life is in many ways multiple because I haven't seen my mother, as a refugee, I haven't seen my mother for 40 years. And I haven't seen my brother and sister all for 40 plus years. So I think this kind of overwhelms everything else. I have a personal experience with the loss of a dog, a very old dog. She lived 25 years actually. Yeah, she lived really old.
Wow, she lived for 25 years?
25 years, yes, in Dharamsala.
That's incredible.
Incredible indeed. Yeah, so we have a very old English woman, a friend of ours. She had a dog, kind of a Lhasa Apso. Smaller dogs tend to live longer, I think. So I did a dog sitting for a month, and one day she disappeared. And there's a Tibetan belief that when the dogs know that they're going to die, they just disappear and go somewhere else to die. And then I wrote an email to the lady saying that maybe this is what happened and we can't find your dog. And the lady said, okay, if that's the story, then I accept. She was in Singapore at the time. Then 2 days later, she came back, the dog, crawling back, and it was in a really bad situation. Anyway, so there's a poem I wrote about this event, and if I may, can I? Dugmo died, vomiting worms from her mouth, slightly agape, like a half-opened book. For the last 3 days, she lay in her kennel. Splotches of blood speckled the bedding made from retired bedsheet. The vet who came to check on her said, it's old age and left. Drukmo's body turned slowly cold, like a spade on a winter's day. We buried her in the forest, piled 3 white stones on her permanent grave, and planted 5 roses around her permanent refuge. After lunch, I sat on a reclining chair, reading The Unbearable Lightness of Being, and dozed off at page 5. Then Dukmu appeared in my dreams, saying, "Don't live too long, it's not worth." I opened my eyes and then went back to reading Kundera. So that's one of the ways with which literature has the power to heal our loss. And this is one of the tools that I use constantly because my life has been a constant challenge as a refugee. And also, every now and then we see a loss of a dog or a friend or a family. So I think literature allows me to, express myself in a way that helps me to heal myself. So, yeah.
Thank you.
We are pet parents. I mean, I think my sons have been brothers to all my dogs. So it's no different. So any loss that occurs to you is an immediate and terribly excruciating loss to the entire family. But having said that, I feel that we emerge from that as better people. I think dogs enrich our lives. They teach us empathy. They teach us caring, loyalty. My children have learned so much from them. They are better human beings because they interacted with the dogs in their lives. They may have lost a couple of them, 3 of them, during their lifetime. But even from those losses, they learned. They learned how to face sorrow early on in life. And they also learned to live in the present moment and really enjoy themselves to the core while they were alive with us. It's an incredible feeling. Yes, there is loss, but the love is way greater that they give us.
So true. I knew we were going to run out of time. We have 13 minutes and lots more to talk about. So quick questions to you. I did want to also talk about what Sanjay had mentioned about responsible pet ownership and also about street dogs. But before that, 2 questions very quickly. Funny story and any literary influences that you had or any favorites in literature or in movies. So I remember when I was growing up, I used to adore Snowy. I think Tintin to me was also about Snowy crashing into the, Bianca Castafiore performance and making it all his own. But I'd love to hear from each of you about any particular literary or movie dog character that you really liked and the funny story.
Yeah, I think the funny story that I can think of is, I don't know how many of you have Dachshunds, but they're absolutely crazy. I mean, they say the reason why Dachshunds are the way they are is because the whole family can pet them at the same time. You can touch them they're just so kind of horizontal. And Dachshunds are fascinating. I mean, if I look at Louis today and, the classical saying, the heart of a lion, the brain of a fox, looks like a sausage, and barks like a Doberman. So here was this guy, and I remember I was doing a TV show. And and this was pre-pandemic, so when TV shows happened, you had these crews that came in, and there were wires, and there was this big umbrella, there was lighting, and there were these tripods, and 2-3 people came together for a show. So, the dogs would have to be not coming into the room. And they hated it, right? It was claustrophobia. Why can't I walk in my own house? So there was a big war between the TV crew and Louis. And of course, there is Oliver, Ollie, and the other dogs in my house. So one fine day, somebody left the door ajar. And I was in the middle of a show. And I've written about this in the book. And this guy managed to sneak in from the bedroom. And because he looked the way he did, a black fried sausage or sheikh kebab, take your pick, the moment he walked in, the cameraman panicked because he was like, is this a dog or what is it? Is it a freak show or what? So, and this guy had an absolute attitude about him. So he really kind of went up and he looked at the guy, gave him that big brown eyes, hard stare. And this fellow in panic, and I was in the middle of a show, tripped. When he tripped, the fear was that the wiring would come off and it would be total chaos. There would be a disconnected transmission. And in between the chaos, I knew what was going on. So I gave, Louis came there and I couldn't say anything, but I gave him a dirty look. He looked back at me like, what the hell are you doing? Why the hell are you giving me an attitude? And before long, he jumped on my lap. And I was on an NDTV show. The cameraman, reacting very quickly, actually changed the angle. Otherwise, Louis would have been on NDTV, 9 o'clock prime time, commenting on the state of the economy, social polarization, and the future of the country. And as he writes in the book in one of the chapters, he says, my biggest regret is that the cameraman was far too quick in his reflexes. As far as the inspiration is concerned, I'll be honest, the biggest inspiration actually has been the dogs that we grew up with as a kid. And I look back and sometimes, can I be honest with you here and I need to be frank, I think we failed many of our dogs at many times. It's a regret at all times, but sometimes you wish you had read that signal a little earlier. Sometimes you wish you had done something more proactively. And there's always a sense of a loss. But I keep telling everybody here, that when dogs vacate your life, there are people who say, I'll never have one. But I think what happens is they expand your capacity to love so much that without them, there's a vacuum that is so impenetrable that the only way you can fill it up, as Gunbir rightly said, is to adopt another one. But then, that's your call.
Well, there's an old Tibetan story in which the mother was very ill and she was at the end of her life. And her last wish was for her boy to obtain a relic of Buddha's relic. And Buddha's relic is as rare as the day, star in the daytime. So he went out walking and he came across a dead dog. So he picked up one of the teeth of a dog and took it to her mother and said, this is Buddha's relic. And she believed, and so the story goes, she was healed, and she lived a long life. Anyway, so coming back to the street dog, our younger son, he wanted a pet dog for many years. And then as I explained earlier, I told him that instead of bringing a dog inside the house, why can't you be friends with about 7, 8 dogs that live next to our house apartment? So now, every day he feeds 7, 8 dogs, street dogs, and he has a name for each of them, and he knows which one is greedy, which one is nice, and which one is, which one fights the most. So I think this is one of the practical ways, maybe, if you have a small house, if you can't afford to or don't have time and resources, then maybe it's, India reportedly has about 36 million street dogs, I believe. So how wonderful if 10% of India feeds the dogs, then we have a really good, happy human-dog relationship out of this gesture.
I think that's a really, really important message. And I think a lot of people talk about adopt, don't shop. It is something that everyone should really think about on a larger scale. But Gunbir, coming to you.
One thing which really fascinates me, that we actually have a constellation called Canis Major. So, and it's in the shape of a dog. So I think it's great. And the ancient Greeks actually used to really wonder about the brightest star in this constellation called Sirius. Now the fun part is that they believed that Sirius rises with the sun and therefore gives them the hottest moments for 40 days of an entire year. And they would actually sacrifice a dog every afternoon in order to cool the thoughts of Cyrus. But that's what gave the name, gave the phrase Dog Day Afternoon. But we believe that the Dog Day Afternoon today is a totally different story. Man, the way they sleep, it's amazing. So coming to that funny story, there was thunder, and in the book I talk about the monsoon in our part of the country. And the need to take my Biba out to pee. My goodness, what a tough one that is. It's pelting. I'm in the rain, and she refuses to come outdoors. So I come back in, pick up an umbrella, and say, chalo, Biba, ab to chalo. So, and very reluctantly she walks along. We go and she parks herself in the center of the road, gracefully as ever, and gets down to pee in the center of the road. And there is this gang of people in a Scorpio, and they're passing by and they stop. You know, I brace myself that they'll go into a puddle, but the fact of the matter is that they just stop. They're laughing. I'm holding on to an umbrella over a dog, which is peeing. And before I knew it, 4 cameras were at it, making us a viral sensation.
Wonderful. I think we may be able to open up to a couple of questions. Should we do that?
Yeah.
Questions, anyone? Lady in the 4th row.
Hi, thank you for that. That's quite special. I'm Mariam. I'm an animal activist, and one of the most concerning things that we see now, and you mentioned it, which was adopt, don't shop. And as JLF was on here, there was a dog show that was going on, and there were a lot of pedigree dogs, and there are a lot of breeders that are unregulated in India. We have a bunch of people sitting here, and I don't know how many of them have purchased, how many of them have adopted, but I'd love to hear your views on adoption so that we can give out a very strong message of why adoption is important, particularly in India, given that breeding is not regulated. You know, there are a lot of countries that now are incentivizing adoptions.
Responsible breeding, yeah.
Absolutely. And they are penalizing irresponsible breeding. Why is India not on that path? Particularly also in Rajasthan, the conditions are really bad.
Well, I would like to tell you that in our country, we don't even treat our fellow human beings very respectfully. Not much of a surprise, to be very frank. I think at the end of the day, I would just like to say this, that I have, always felt that the dogs, the indies as we call them, get a raw deal. But my daughters, my wife, we have adopted 2 indies at home. And I think, as you realized, right? I mean, it doesn't matter whether they're breed or otherwise, but they just kind of make such a difference to your life. They bring so much of shine to your life. But then you'll see also the kind of heartlessness that is in our society. I read these ghastly stories, and I'm sure all of you do, where people during the Diwali, for example, they tie a cracker around a dog's tail,
Yes.
and watch that entire horrific episode and try and trend it on Instagram. It's at the end of the day, I always believe that there is a lot that we need to learn. I think people who actually, I have a great objection actually to this term that, and I can tell you that is in politics. When people say politics in this country has gone to the dogs, I say, hey, you're doing a great insult to the dogs. And actually, you don't deserve to say that. Because dogs don't lynch. Dogs don't assassinate. Dogs don't do mob fury. Dogs don't make hate speech. And I think we don't recognize these realities of our life. So I'm going to tell you that in all our capacity, as I think Baichung mentioned that as well, we need to really look at all animals and tell ourselves, even this movie Animal, I thought did a great disservice to animals, man.
It's pejorative.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the title.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do feel that, this whole, at the end of the day, compassion, caring, empathy, these are words by which in today's society, Hemali, we think, they will say, well, these 3 guys are soft people because they love animals or they love dogs. And I think it's such a stupid assessment of people who have a heart. So, we live in a world where having a heart is considered to be, oh my God, you're such a softie. You're not made for this tough world. And I think this is an important question you have raised. And a regulation on breeded dogs, that's an industry of frauds. I think people who are actually in a great number of ways damaging what are supposed to be the original breeds they come from. Tragedy.
I think linked to this, sorry, is also the fact that punishment for animal abuse in our country is just ridiculous. It's a joke. So if you're caught with, some kind of abuse, you'll be fined 50 rupees or 200 rupees or something. It's as ridiculous as that. So that is a very important point that you've raised, and I wish we had more time. Also about responsibility in terms of sterilization, street dogs. How do you actually talk about that? But this is a conversation perhaps we can continue post this.
I just want to add here, every indie she-dog in our neighborhood has access to my side lane, and she's tended to, she lays her puppies there. They are the friends to my Biba. So I think we should actually, all of us here, raise a slogan to adopt an indie, because unless we do that, we will not be able to take care of the strays which are our own.
I think that's the perfect note to end this session on. I did also want to say that all of their books are available at the store and here. Please check them out. They are wonderful reads. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
we'll
Hemali.
continue
Thank
the
you, Hemali.
conversation.